8 hours, she said, and you've already wasted 4 minutes standing in my doorway like a man who's forgotten how doors work. I had forgotten. That was the shameful truth of it. 28 days on 4 legs teaches you a great many things and unteaches a few others, and the first of the ones it unteaches is the hinge. I stood on the tower step with the salt wind pushing at my back and looked at the iron latch as though it were a riddle, and Tamsin Woad reached past me, lifted it, and shoved the door open with her hip the way she had done 100 times before. "In," she said. "The tea's hot and it won't stay hot for your dignity." I went in. Behind me the moon was coming up out of the gray water, fat and low and yellow as tallow, and somewhere below the headland the town of Saltmere was putting out its lamps and locking its shutters, because the full moon over Kelsmere meant the Cliff Wolf would be about, and everybody knew what everybody had been told. That the beast on the headland was a killer, that it had come down out of the north 12 years ago, and that the warden of Caldrith would have its hide any season now. Nobody in that town knew. They were bolting their doors against their king. I had 8 hours. From the moment the moon's whole face cleared the water until the long bell struck the 8th stroke of the watch. I was Sorin of Kelsmere, a man with hands, with a voice, with the name my mother gave me. After the 8th stroke I was what the binding had made me. 12 years I had lived by that arithmetic. 96 hours a year. 4 days of manhood spread thin as butter over a hard loaf. 3 of those years I had spent them in a bell tower with a woman who had never once been afraid of me. The room at the top of the long bell was small and round and smelled of pitch, sheep tallow, and the sea. 72 stairs got you there. I had counted them the first night the way a drowning man counts strokes. There was a straw pallet, a shelf of our candles marked with rings of black wax, a brazier that drew badly, a rope that came down through a hole in the ceiling and ended in a worn leather grip, and a table. At the table there were 2 chairs. There had been 2 chairs on the first night, before she had any reason at all to expect a second person, and I had never asked her why, and she had never told me. "Sit," Tamsin said. You're always gray the first hour." "It passes. It passes because you sit and drink something." She poured barley tea into a chipped cup and pushed it across the boards, and then she sat down opposite me and folded her hands, and the ringing stopped. I should explain the ringing. The binding had left a sound in my skull. Not a loud one, a thin silver tone, high and constant, the note a wet finger draws off the rim of a glass, and it never ceased, not sleeping, not running, not in the deep of winter with my head under my own tail in a crack of the cliff. 12 years of that note. It had worn a groove in me. Some nights I would have traded the 4 legs and kept the hearing if the choosing had been offered. The first time I climbed the tower stairs in my human hours and came into that round room, and she looked up from her mending and said, "Well, you're wet." The note stopped. Just stopped, like a hand laid flat on a struck bell. I had stood there in the doorway with my mouth open and the silence roaring in me, and I had believed for a moment that the binding had broken. It hadn't. When I left the tower that night, the note came back before I reached the 3rd stair, faithful as a dog. But inside that room, across that table with her hands folded, my head was quiet. I had never told her. How does a man say it? "Woman, I have been screaming inside for 12 years, and you turn it off." I did not have the hours to spare on being refused. "You've a limp," she said. "I've a splinter." "You've a limp." "I have a splinter in my foot, and I would like to keep some small amount of my pride, Tamsin." She got up, took the tallow lamp off its hook, dragged the 2nd chair around, and knelt down in front of me on the boards without one word of permission asked, and lifted my heel into her lap. That was Tamsin Woad. She never asked. She simply decided that the thing wanted doing and did it, and it was worth more to me than every bowed head I had ever been given in a throne hall. "Hold still." "I am holding still." "You're a liar and a king of liars." Her fingers were cold. The tower was always cold. She worked the point of a needle at the ball of my foot with her tongue between her teeth. "There, see, Thorn, you've been up on the north track." "I've been up on the north track." "There's nothing on the north track but gorse and grief." "There's a view." "There's a view here." She dropped the thorn into the brazier, where it went off with a small spit. "You can see the whole hold from the leads. You just never go up to the leads because you're afraid of the bell." I let that sit. Below us, 72 stairs down and half a mile east, the lights of Caldrith Hold were coming up along the cliff. My father's hall, my grandfather's hall. The long-lit windows of the great chamber where a man who was not the Alpha of Kelsmere was even now sitting in the Alpha's chair with his boots on my father's fender. "I am not afraid of the bell," I said. "No," Tamsin agreed and got up and set the lamp back on its hook. "You're afraid of the 8th stroke, which is sensible since you won't tell me what happens at it." She said it lightly. She always said the dangerous things lightly, the way you carry a full cup. 3 years. 36 nights, near enough. She had missed one with a fever, and I had lain on the step outside the door for 8 hours listening to her breathe on the other side of it, which is not a thing I have ever admitted aloud. 36 nights of 8 hours each. 288 hours, all told, of my whole human life, and I had spent nearly every one of them in a round room with a woman who did not know my name. She knew a name. She knew Soren because I gave her that much the second month, when she asked what to call me, and I found I could not lie to her and could not tell her the truth either, so I gave her the middle of it. Half the men in Kelsmere were called Soren. It was a fisherman's name, a name for a fourth son. She did not know that the last man to hold it whole had been crowned at 19 in the hall at Caldrith, with his father's ring loose on his thumb. "Tamsin, why are there 2 chairs?" She was at the shelf, turning the hour candle so the ring of black wax sat true against the pin. She did not look round. "Because the tower was built for 2 keepers," she said. "One to watch, one to sleep. Wardens cut the post to one and kept the second wage. Everybody knows that." "That is not why." "It's the true reason. It is a true reason. It is not why." She turned then and leaned back against the shelf with her arms folded, and the lamp put her shadow up the curve of the wall, and she looked at me for a long moment with that steady gray consideration that I have seen on exactly 2 faces in my life, hers and my mother's. "Because the first night you came," she said, "you were half dead and you wouldn't sit on the pallet and you stood by the door for the whole watch like you thought I'd send you off. And I thought, he'll not come back, and then next moon I heard the stairs." She shrugged one shoulder. "So I set out the chair before you got to the top, so you'd not have to ask." "That was 3 years ago." "Yes. You've set it out every moon since." "Yes." "Tamsin." "Don't," she said, "make a speech. You've got 7 hours and there's fish." There was fish. There was always fish, and bread from the Saltmere bakehouse gone hard at the crust, and once, memorably, a pear she had been saving since autumn wrapped in wool like a relic, which she cut in half with a knife she used for rope, and watched me eat with an expression I have never forgotten. That is what the 8 hours were. Not the hunted thing, not the cold, not the 12 years. Fish and hard bread, and a woman telling me the gossip of a fishing town as though I were an ordinary man who had been away at sea. The warden's steward had raised the salt tax again. Old Barrack's boat had come in stove, and his sons were fighting over it. The new priestess at the chapel of the Moonwell sang flat and knew it and sang anyway, which Tamsin approved of. There was to be a great gathering at the hold at midsummer. The whole pack of Kelsmere called in from the out farms, and the warden had promised them a hunt. I set down the cup. "A hunt. That's the word." She was scraping the pan. "They're saying he'll have every wolf of the pack out along the headland at the full moon and drive the cliff wolf off the north edge or into the nets. He's had the nets made. Grenard's wife has been sewing them since Candlemas and complaining the whole while." "At the full moon." "That's what I said. He means to hunt it at the full moon." Tamsin stopped scraping. She looked at me over her shoulder, and something moved behind her eyes, and I understood with a cold slide in my belly that she was not a stupid woman and had never been one, and that I had been coming to her tower at the full moon and only at the full moon for 3 years. "Soren," she said, "what happens at the 8th stroke?" The long bell struck the 3rd hour above us. It is a strange thing to be inside a bell tower when the bell goes. Tamsin rang it, of course. She rang every hour of the night watch. That was the post. That was the bread and the firewood and the 16 shillings a year the warden's steward paid her. But she had rung the 3rd before we sat, on the pin, on the mark, the way she rang every hour of her life. What I mean is the sound stays in the stone. You feel it in the boards under your boots. The whole tower speaks for 11 long seconds and then goes on humming, and while it hums, nobody can say anything, and I have never in my life been so glad of a bell. When it faded, she was still looking at me. "You've dodged that question for 3 years," she said. "I have." "You'll dodge it again." "I will." Why? Because you would look at me differently. Because you would look at me the way Saltmere looks at the headland on the nights the moon is full. Bolt the door, bank the fire, don't let the children out. Because in this room, for 8 hours, I am a man who was late at the door and had a splinter, and if you knew, I would be a monster who visits. Because I would rather have the hours, I said. She was quiet. Then she came back to the table and sat, and reached over and put her cold hand flat on the back of my wrist. And the silver note in my skull, already silent, went somehow more silent, if you will permit the impossibility. All right, she said, but you should know I'm not a fool and I've counted moons. I know you have. And there's a hunt coming. I know there is. And if I asked you to be somewhere else that night, somewhere inland, somewhere with a roof and a door and no nets, would you go? I turned my hand over under hers, which was not a thing I had ever done, and she did not take hers away, which was not a thing I had expected. No, I said. Why not? Because I have 8 hours a month, Tamsin, and I will not spend them anywhere but here. I have been a king. I have stood in the hall at Caldrith and taken the oaths of 400 wolves with my father's ring on my hand, and felt nothing at all but the weight of the day. I tell you plainly that the 11 seconds after I said that were the largest of my life. She did not answer. She got up. She always got up when a thing came too close, and she went to the ladder that ran up through the ceiling into the bell chamber, and she said over her shoulder in a voice that was not quite steady, "Come up. You've never come up. I want to show you the thing you're afraid of." I went up. I want to be careful here, because everything turned on it, and I have gone over it 1,000 times since in the small hours, and I still do not know whether it was chance, or whether the moon had been waiting 3 years for me to climb one more ladder. The bell chamber of the Long Bell is open on 4 sides, arched, with the sea on 2 of them and the whole black shoulder of the headland on the 3rd and the lights of Caldrith on the 4th. The bell hangs on a great oak stock, and it is bigger than you think a bell is until you stand under one. It is old. It was hung the year my grandfather was born. And it is silver. Not silver-plated, not silvered. The Long Bell of Kelsmere was cast with silver in the bronze. That is why she sings so high and carries so far, why fishermen 20 miles out can hear her over weather. Every child in Saltmere knows the tale, that the silver came out of the moonwell in the chapel yard, and that the bellwright who took it did not steal it but was given it by the priestesses of that day for a purpose. I had known that tale since I was 6 years old. I had never once thought about it. I stood under her with my head back and the moon coming through the west arch, and the great curve of her hung over me the way a wave hangs, and the silver note in my skull, which was silent, which had been silent since I came through that door, did not come back. But the bell hummed. She hummed. Standing dead still, untouched with the wind going through the arches, that bell was holding a thin, high tone, and it was the same tone, note for note, the tone that had been living behind my eyes for 12 years. "Do you hear that?" I said. "Hear what?" "She's ringing." Tamsin frowned and put her hand flat on the bell's shoulder. "She does that in a westerly. She's been doing it since before I came." "Since before you came?" "Old Marrow said she started it the year the king died." She said it easily, the way you say a thing everybody says. "That's a story, mind. Old Marrow said a lot of things." "The year the king died." 12 years. I put my own hand on the bronze, and I want to tell you what that was like. It was like laying your palm on a horse that knows you. There was a shiver in the metal that answered me. I felt it go up my arm and into my jaw and behind my ears, and for one endless moment the whole tower and the sea and the moon narrowed to one small point of understanding. And I thought, in the flat voice a man uses inside his own head when the ground has gone. It is not in me, it has never been in me, it is in the bell. 12 years I had thought myself cursed. A man carries a curse the way he carries a wound. It is his, it is inside him, there is nothing to be done but bear it. I had borne it. I had gone up the north track and looked at the sea and borne it, moon after moon, and never once in 12 years had it occurred to me that the thing had a house, and that its house was a bell my grandfather's people had hung on a headland, and that a woman I had come to love was paid 16 shillings a year to ring it. "Soren," Tamsin's voice sharp, "sit down, you've gone the color of the wall." "Whose is she?" "What?" "The bell who cast her. Bells are signed. Every bell is signed on the lip." I was already moving, down under the mouth of her, ducking into that great cold cave of bronze with the tallow lamp held up in my fist, and Tamsin was saying something behind me about the clapper and my skull, and I did not hear a word of it because the light had found the founder's mark. It was a hand's length of lettering, worn shallow, cast proud in the bronze in the old square hand they used before my grandfather's time. Cast at the moonwell of Saltmere for the keeping of the hours, AWODE. I came out from under that bell very slowly. Tamsin was standing with her arms folded against the cold and the moon behind her, and she raised her eyebrows at whatever was on my face. "What?" "Woad," I said. "That's my name. I know it is your name. Half the headland's called Woad." She rubbed her arms. "There were 4 brothers or 5 back whenever, foundry family, they went poor and they went, most of them. My grandfather kept a forge in Saltmere and mended anchors and drank the profit, if you want the honest version, and my father went out on a boat and didn't come back, and my mother—" She stopped and shrugged, the small shrug she used for the whole of her life. "And so there's me, ringing the hours for the man who broke us. It's a living." "The man who broke you." "The warden." She said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. "You know he closed the foundry, 12 years back near enough. Said the moonwell was to be kept and no metal drawn from the yard again, and Woads had drawn from that yard for 200 years by right and by charter, and that was that. No forge, no charter, no bread. My grandfather went to the hold to ask for the charter back, and they wouldn't let him pass the gate." She looked up at the bell. "So I keep her. It's what's left. Somebody in this family ought to be near her." I put out a hand and steadied myself on the oak stock, and I am not ashamed to say it, because the floor of that chamber had become a very uncertain thing. 12 years ago, the warden of Caldreth had closed the moonwell to the family that cast the long bell, and sealed the yard, and driven the last of them down to 16 shillings a year. 12 years ago, I had woken on the shingle at the foot of the cliff with 4 legs and a silver note in my head. "Tamsin," I said, "sit down." "I'm not sitting down." "You sit down." "Sit down, please, and let me be a man for 1 hour, because I do not have very many of them, and I am going to spend one telling you the truth." Something in my voice did it. She sat on the sill of the west arch with the moon at her back and the whole gray water behind her, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she waited, and I have never had a harder audience or a kinder one. So I told her about the hall at Caldreth, and my father dying badly in a winter and being crowned at 19 with the ring loose on my thumb, and my father's half-brother Havard standing at my right hand at the crowning with his palm flat between my shoulders, steadying, everyone said. A steady man, Havard. A useful man. The kind of uncle a young alpha is lucky to have. I told her about the 8 years I ruled, badly at first and then not so badly, and the salt tax I would not raise, and the charter of the Moonwell that came before me twice, and that I signed both times in favor of the founders, because my father had signed it and his father before him, and because a kingdom that cannot ring its hours is not a kingdom. I told her about the night I rode out to the headland alone because a message came saying there had been a rockfall at the tower, and the keeper's boy was under it, and how there was no rockfall and no boy, and how there was a woman standing on the shingle in a gray wrap with wet feet and a face like a shut door. She had a bowl, I said. Not a knife, not a fire, nothing you'd expect. A shallow bowl with water in it, and she held it up so the moon sat in it, and she said, "Soren of Kelsmere, your uncle has bought the hours of your life and paid honestly, so I will take them honestly." And I laughed at her. You laughed. I was 27 and I had never been afraid of anything, which is the same as being a fool. I laughed and I said something about my uncle's honesty. And she said, "The bell will keep you. 8 hours to the moon's full face, a man, the rest, the shape underneath. Your own hold will not know you and your own name will not fit in your mouth." Tamsin's face had not moved. Her hands in her lap had gone white at the knuckles. And then, I said, she tipped the bowl out on the shingle, and up on this headland, at an hour that was not an hour, the long bell struck once. And I heard it in my teeth. And the last thing I remember as a man is my own horse screaming and going up the track without me. The wind came through the arches. Below us, the sea went at the rocks the way it has gone at them since before there were kings in Kelsmere to care. "You're the king," Tamsin said. I was. "You're the king," she stood up. "You're the king, and you've been sitting in my tower eating my fish for 3 years, and you let me tell you the price of herring." Tamsin, and complain about the salt tax. Tamsin, to the man who set the salt tax, who refused to raise it, I said, and has had to listen to what it is now every moon for 3 years from the one person in this kingdom who tells me the truth and could do nothing about it and would have given his right hand to. That stopped her. She stood there in the arch with the moon on her hair and her fists at her sides, and I watched her turn it over, all of it, at speed. She was quick. She was always quick, and I watched her arrive. "The Cliff Wolf," she said. "Yes." "The Cliff Wolf is you." "Yes." "The thing they're going to drive into the nets at midsummer with 400 wolves, and my warden's blessing is you." "Yes." "And at the 8th stroke of the watch," her voice cracked, and she stopped and started again harder. "At the 8th stroke every moon for 3 years, you've walked down my stairs and out my door and turned into that." "Yes." "And I rang it," said Tamsin Woad. I will carry the sound she made when she said that until they put me in the ground beside my father. She had rung the 8th hour 36 times with her own 2 hands, on the pin, on the mark, because it was her post and her bread and her family's bell, while the man she had set a second chair out for went down the 72 stairs to meet it. She had counted the hours of my life away and been paid 16 shillings a year for it. "Tamsin, listen to me. Don't. You did not do this. He did this. He bought it and he paid honestly, whatever that woman meant by honestly, and he has been sitting in my father's chair for 12 years telling this kingdom I am dead. I rang the bell, and he closed the Moonwell the same season," I said, "and put your family out of the yard, and I never once in 12 years understood why. Do you understand? He was not being cruel. He was being careful. He shut the well because the well made the silver, and the silver made the bell, and the bell holds me, and he did not want anybody left in Kelsmere who knew how the metal was worked." The long bell struck the 4th hour. Neither of us had rung it. We stood there under 1,200 weight of humming bronze, and the sound came out of it untouched, 11 seconds of it, filling the chamber and the tower and the whole black headland, and Tamsin's face in the lamplight went from grief to something else altogether, something I recognized, because it is the thing I had seen on my father's face across a council table, and it is the beginning of a fight. The hum faded. "She rang herself," Tamsin said. "She did. She has never done that, not once, not in 3 years. She put her hand on the bronze again, and this time she did not take it away. "Soren, she's counting you down. There's a hunt coming at the full moon, and the bell has started ringing her own hours. 4 struck and 4 gone, 4 left." Below us, along the black cliff road from Caldrith, a line of small orange lights had come out of the Hold Gate and was moving, unhurried, toward the headland. Torches, a dozen of them, and behind the torches, the shapes that move at a lope and do not need torches at all. "Soren," Tamsin said, very quietly, looking down at the road. "Why is the warden's man coming up the Tower Road at the 4th hour of the night watch?" I went down the ladder first and put out the lamp, and Tamsin came after me and shut the trap, and we stood in the dark of the round room listening to hooves on the Tower Road. "How long have you got?" she said. 4 hours. "Less. Then get behind the shelf." "Tamsin, there is a man coming up my stairs at the 4th hour of the watch, and there is no reason on this earth for you to be here that will not cost me my post, my roof, and probably my neck." She was already pulling the second chair back against the wall, sliding my cup into the water pail, dragging the pallet straight. 3 seconds and the room said one keeper lived in it. Behind the shelf. There is a gap between the hour candle shelf and the curve of the wall where the stone bulges out. I had never noticed it. She had. It took the whole of me if I stood sideways and did not breathe like a man who has just learned that his uncle bought his life out of a bowl of seawater. The stairs took a while, 72 of them do. "Keeper." "I, steward." Tamsin's voice went flat and dull, a voice for warden's men 3 shades stupider than her own. "Long climb." "It is a cursed long climb." Goran Sedge came into the room breathing like a bellows. I could not see him from behind the shelf, but I did not need to. I had known Goran 12 years ago as a thin, careful clerk with a habit of agreeing with whoever had last spoken, and by the sound of him he had eaten well since. "Light your lamp, girl, I'll not stand in the dark." "Lamp's out, oil's short till quarter-day." He stopped, recovered. "Then we'll do it by the moon, warden's business." "At the 4th hour." "At any hour he likes, he's the warden, Boots on Boards. You'll have heard about Midsummer. Half the town's heard about Midsummer. Grenard's wife sewn her fingers to stumps on those nets. Then hear the rest. From this moon to the next, this tower comes under the hold's hand. 2 of the warden's men will lodge here on the nights of the watch. I felt the room change. Tamsin did not make a sound, and the room changed anyway. There's 1 pallet, she said. They'll bring their own. There's 1 room, steward. And you'll manage or you'll not, and either way it's ordered. Something creaked. He had sat down in her chair. Don't sulk at me, girl, it's not my doing. He wants the headland watched from the height. Every path off it, every night from now to the hunt. If the beast moves, he wants to know which way. And after Midsummer. A pause, and I heard in it exactly the shape of the man. After Midsummer, the keeper's post is under review, Goran said. The warden's of a mind that once the beast is dealt with, there'll be no need to man the tower at all. The bell can be struck at dawn and dusk by a lad from the chapel. The hours have been rung on this headland for 200 years. And the salt tax has been paid for 200 years, and it's still gone up, said Goran, not unkindly, which was the worst of him. Times change, now the orders. Paper, the particular crackle of a hold warrant, thick and waxed at the fold. You'll read it to me, Tamsin said. You know I don't read. She read as well as any clerk in Kelsmere. She had read the whole of my grandmother's Book of Hours to me over 2 winters, a page an hour, because it was the only book in the tower. Goran sighed and read it out, and I stood in the dark behind a shelf of tallow candles with my heart going like a hammer, because the thing he read was the thing I had needed for 12 years and had never once thought to look for. Standing orders of the Warden of Caldrith to the keeper of the Long Bell, the hours of the night watch to be struck true, on the pin, by the keeper's own hand. Failure of any hour a matter for the hold court, and then set apart in its own clause in the language they use when a thing matters. And most particularly upon the nights of the moon's full face, the 8th stroke of the night watch shall be struck at the pin, without fail and without abatement, though the keeper be sick, though the weather be foul, though the town be burning. Should the 8th stroke of such a night go unstruck, the keeper's post, house, and person are forfeit to the warden's judgment, and the same to be accounted the gravest breach in the gift of this hold. Silence in the round room. That's the same as last year's, Tamsin said, dull, stupid, perfect. It's the same as every year since before I held the office. Old Marrow had it read to him twice a year for 9 years, and it never made him ring any straighter. Goran got up. Mind the 8th, girl, that one they count. Who counts it? He does, said Goran. He's at his window on those nights. He's always at his window on those nights. And then he went, and his men went, and the torches went back down the road, and Tamsin Woad stood in the middle of her floor in the dark for a long moment before she said, very quietly, 12 years. I came out from behind the shelf. 12 years, she said again. There has been a clause in the keeper's orders about the 8th stroke of the full moon watch, and every keeper who ever held the post read it and thought it was old nonsense, and rang the bell, and got their 16 shillings, and went to bed. Yes. Old Marrow rang it for 9 years, and whoever was before him. Her voice was doing something I did not like. There's been a hand on that rope every full moon for 12 years, Soren, and there always had to be, or it wouldn't have. It would not have held, I said. No, I think that is exactly right. He's been paying us. She laughed, one hard breath of it, and it was worse than crying. He shut my family's forge and put us in the dirt, and then he set one of us in this tower for 16 shillings a year to keep his own nephew a beast, and we said thank you. Tamsin, don't say my name in that voice. I have 3 hours, I said, and I am not going to spend them watching you take his sin on your back. Look at me, look at me. In 12 years nobody has come close to this. Nobody. Not one of the 400 wolves in that hold, not one of the men who ate at my father's table. You did it in half an hour because you asked why there were 2 chairs. She looked up at me. You asked why there were 2 chairs. Then we did it together, and I will take my share of the credit. Now put your boots on. Why? Because I want to see the moon well, I said, and I have never in 12 years had a reason to spend an hour of my life walking, and tonight I do. The chapel of the Moonwell stands in the yard behind Saltmere on the land side, out of the wind, in a walled garden with 3 thorn trees in it. My grandfather's grandfather built the wall. The well itself is older than the wall, older than the chapel, older, they say, than the pack. We went down the headland with the moon high and the town asleep below us and the nets. I saw them as we passed the boat sheds, stacked and pale and enormous, a whole winter's work, made to a size, and Tamsin walked fast and did not speak until we were past the last house. Then she said, "You'll not go up on that headland at midsummer. We will discuss it." We will not discuss it because there is nothing to discuss. 400 wolves and nets and a cliff. What do you imagine happens? You're one animal. I am one animal with 8 hours of hands, I said, and the first thing I am going to do with the next 8 is not be hunted. That's not an answer. It is the only one I have at the moment. The chapel gate was chained. It had been chained for 12 years. I could see that from the state of the chain, orange and fused, and the grass grown up the wall. Tamsin looked at it for a moment, then went along the wall to the third thorn tree, put her boot in a crack, and was over the top before I could say a word. "There's a way in at the yard end," she said down at me. "There's always a way in." "Does the priestess know you use it?" "The priestess taught it me." The priestess of the Moonwell was called Neve, and she was perhaps 60, and she came out of the chapel in a wrap with her hair in a gray plait, holding a candle, and she looked at Tamsin, and then she looked at me, and she went absolutely still. "Neve, it's only me." "Be quiet," said the priestess. She came down the 2 steps into the yard, and she walked the whole way round me once, close, with the candle up. I had met her twice as king. I had been 23 the last time and had not listened to a word she said, which is the general run of what a king does with priestesses. She stopped in front of me. "They told us you drowned," she said. "I did not drown." "No," her mouth worked. "No, and I have been singing the hour hymn to a shut well for 12 years and getting nothing back, and the bell up on that headland has been humming out of season the whole time, and I told the hold and they sent a clerk to write it down and nothing came of it." She put a hand out and pressed it flat and hard against my chest, over the sternum, the way you test a hull. "Sorin of Kelsmere." "Where have you been?" "On the headland," I said, "on 4 legs since the night my uncle bought my hours." Neve did not scream and did not weep. She turned around and went back up the steps and came out again with a key ring the size of a dinner plate and said, "Come inside, both of you, and be quick, and don't stand on the flags near the door. The flags near the door are loose, and they're loose for a reason." The chapel was cold and smelled of wet stone. The Moonwell is in the floor of it, a round rim of dark green stone about the width of a cartwheel, and water in it that goes down further than anyone has ever measured with a line. It was black, flat black, like a hole cut in the floor. "It has been like that since the year you went," Neve said. "It used to hold the moon." "The whole moon, whatever the sky was doing, whatever the weather, that's what it's for. That is the entire nature of the thing." She set her candle on the rim. "Then one night it went dark, and the next morning the warden's men came and sealed the yard and closed the founders out of it, and I have been keeping a dead well ever since." I said Havard bought a binding from a woman on the shingle with a gray wrap and a shallow bowl. Neve went as gray as her plate. "Say that again." "A woman with a bowl of seawater and the moon sitting in it. She said he had bought the hours of my life and paid honestly." "Then he did not buy it from a hedge witch," said Neve, "and God help this kingdom. That is not a curse, my lord, that is a keeping. That is the old right of the hours, and it was never made for men, it was made for grief. A woman who could not bear her husband's dying would come here and buy an hour of him back and pay for it in years off her own life, and the priestesses of that day would draw the silver, and it would be cast into a bell so that the hours had a voice, because a keeping without a voice runs wild." She was moving as she talked, to the chest under the east window, dragging out a flat wooden case bound in iron. "It was forbidden 400 years ago because they found what everyone always finds, which is that a thing which can hold a man's hours can hold a man, and the well was shut to it. And the silver of it, every grain of Moonwell silver ever drawn since, is in one place in this kingdom." "The long bell," said Tamsin. "The long bell," said Neve, "which your family cast and to a right and under an oath and did not know they were writing the last page of the last book." She got the case open. Inside was a book with a cover that had once been white. "Sit down, you have how long?" I looked at the window. The moon had swung. 2 hours and a little. "Then don't interrupt." She read to us for a quarter of an hour, and I will give you the shape of it and not the words. because the words were old and half of them were in the founder's tongue, and Neve had to stop and chew on them. A keeping is a bargain in metal. It has a buyer, a subject, and a voice. The voice is the bell. The buyer pays, the subject is kept, the bell counts. So long as the bell speaks the hours true and on the pin, the keeping holds, and it holds against anything, against prayer, against distance, against death. There was a case in the book of a keeping that outlived every person who had touched it and went on keeping a stretch of road empty for 90 years. And it has a door. Every keeping has a door because the old right makers were not fools and would not make a thing with no way out. The door is the founder's hand. The blood that drew the silver and cast the metal is the blood the silver knows. It is the only hand the bell will answer against itself. "That's me," Tamsin said. "That is you. How do I open it?" Neve put her finger on the page and did not look up. "You don't ring the 8th hour," she said. "That is all. The keeping is made of struck hours, withhold one, and it has no voice. But," and now she did look up, "there is a price, and the book is very clear, and I want you to hear it twice. The silver does not give a thing back for nothing. It has been holding for 12 years, and it will want the weight of that. The founder's blood may withhold the hour, but the founder's blood must be under the bell when the hour goes unstruck, and must stand there past it, and must choose the subject as he is at that moment, not as the man, girl, as the thing the keeping has made of him." The chapel was very quiet. "Choose him," Tamsin said. "Stand under 1200 weight of silvered bronze at the top of a tower with a wolf past the hour and not run. That is the door. That is the whole of the door." Neve shut the book. "And I will tell you what your uncle was told, my lord, because whoever sold him this told him this. They are required to, they must say the door aloud. That is also in the right. He was told. The keeping breaks if a soul of the founder's blood stands by the beast past the 8th hour and chooses it." "And he laughed," said Neve. "I should think, because who does that? Who stands in the dark with a beast and chooses it? And then to be safe, because he is a careful man, he shut the well and broke the forge and put the founder's blood out on the road to starve, and paid what was left of it 16 shillings a year to pull the rope. I found that I had stood up. I do not remember doing it. 'What is the price?' I said. 'I've told you she must stand.' No, my voice came out with the hall in it, the old voice, the one I had not used in 12 years and had not known was still in me. 'You said the silver will want the weight of 12 years. Neve, what does it take?' Neve looked at me steadily. 'The book does not say,' she said. 'The book says, the silver takes its due of the one who opens the door, and it is not to be haggled. In every account I have read the founder lived. In 2 of them the founder did not. Then it is not to be done. Soren, it is not to be done.' I turned on Tamsin. 'Do you hear me? It is not to be done. 12 years is not so long. I have had 8 hours a moon, and I have not been unhappy, Tamsin. I have not lately, not since the tower, and I will not buy the rest of my life at a shop that keeps that kind of price.' 'Sit down,' said Tamsin. 'I will not.' 'Sit down, you great stubborn animal. You've an hour and a half and you're wasting it shouting at a priestess.' She stood up herself and went to the rim of the well and looked into the black water. 'Neve, when it went dark.' 'Was it the same night?' 'The same night.' 'Why?' 'Because the well is the moon's cup,' said Neve, 'and the moon's own metal had been turned to a wicked use by a hand it knew. It's shut. It has been shut since. I sing to it twice a day, and it does not answer, and I have made my peace with that, and I will tell you honestly that I have thought some very hard thoughts about your family, girl, over 12 years for casting that bell.' Tamsin leaned over the rim. 'I saw it happen. I want that on the record, because in the days afterwards there were 400 wolves in Kelsmere who wanted to tell the story their own way, and the true version is this. Nobody sang, nobody prayed, nobody performed a rite. A tired woman in a wet wool coat leaned over a black well to look at it because she was thinking, and the water lit. Not a reflection. There was no moon in that chapel. The window is on the east, and the moon was west, and the sky was half cloud. The water in the moonwell of Saltmere went from black to silver white, all at once, from the bottom up, and it threw the whole vault of the ceiling into light, and Neve made a sound I hope never to hear from a woman again as long as I live, and went down on the flags on both knees." Tamsin jerked back with her hand over her mouth. "What did I do?" "Nothing," Neve whispered, "nothing at all. You stood there. And I stood there too, in a chapel full of light off a well that had been dead since the night I lost my name. looking at a woman I had been eating hard bread with for 3 years, and the last piece of it came down on me like a slate off a roof. The silence, 12 years of a silver note behind my eyes, and it stopped in one room in one tower, and I had thought it was the room. I had thought it was the tallow and the tea and the boards and the 2 chairs. I had been so grateful for the room that I had never once asked whether it might be the woman. Because a wolf knows its mate by scent, and I had had no true scent for 12 years. The keeping takes that. That is one of the things it takes. The world comes to you flat and far off like a hall you are not allowed into. And a man knows his mate by the bond, and the bond had been shut behind 1,200 weight of bronze for 12 years hammering, and all it could get through was one thin silence. She had been in that tower 3 years. 3 years of me coming up 72 stairs, 8 hours at a time, to sit in the one place in the world where my head was quiet, and calling it luck. "Soren," Tamsin said, "your face has gone strange again." "Neve," I said, "get up off the floor." "My lord." "Get up, please. I am going to ask you something, and I want you standing." She got up. "Does a keeping stop a mate bond?" Neve looked from me to Tamsin and back, and she was old and quick, and I watched her arrive at it a half-second before her mouth moved. "It stops everything that isn't the ours," she said. "That is what a keeping is. It puts a man in a box, my lord, and the box has one window in it, and the window is 8 hours wide." She swallowed. Oh, you poor pair of creatures." Tamsin said, "What?" And nobody answered her, and she said louder, "What?" And I said her name. Just her name. And she stopped and looked at me, and I watched the same slate come down on her. I am not going to set out what was said in that chapel in the last hour of my 37th full moon, because some of it was not fine speaking, and some of it I would not repeat outside my own house. I will give you 3 pieces. I said, 3 years I have climbed that tower because it is the only place I do not hurt, and I told myself it was the room. She said after a long time, "I've set that chair out at moonrise in a gale. I've set it out with a fever on me and one shoe. Whatever's in me knew before I did." And when I said that a mate bond is not a small thing to be handed to a woman on the same night she learns the rest of it, and that she had a right to a great deal of time and to a clear head, and that I would not take one word from her tonight and would ask her nothing and hold her to nothing, she said, "You've 40 minutes. Don't be noble at me, Soren. I haven't the patience for it." Neve walked us to the yard wall. At the thorn tree she caught my sleeve. "Midsummer is the next full moon," she said. "The hunt is the next full moon." "I know." "He is not hunting a beast, my lord. He has had 12 years of a beast on that headland and never once made a net. He is hunting now because somebody has told him something, or because that bell has started striking her own hours, and he is at his window on those nights and he has heard it." Her fingers were like wire. "He is closing the account. Don't you go up there." "That is my hold," I said, "and that is my headland, and that is my bell." "You are one wolf." "Yes," I said, "and next moon for 8 hours I am also the Alpha King of Kelsmere, and there are men in that hold who took my father's oath at that table, and I intend to stand in front of them with my own face on." We climbed the headland fast. The moon was going down the western sky, and the eastern edge of the sea had begun to think about gray. At the tower door, Tamsin stopped with the key in her hand. "How long?" "8 minutes. Perhaps 10. Then come up." "No." "Soren." "No, and you know why not." I put my hands on her shoulders, and I remember exactly the give of the wet wool under my palms, because it was the last thing my hands did. "The 8th stroke is coming, and you are going to ring it." "I am not." "You are, because if you do not ring it tonight, in a fortnight there will be 2 of the warden's men lodging in that room, and Goran will have written a report, and the hold court will have your post and your roof, and you will be somewhere else at midsummer." I held on. "Do you understand me? Tonight the door stays shut. Tonight you ring it exactly as you have rung it 36 times, and you go to bed, and you get up and you buy fish. And in 28 days, when 400 wolves come up this road with nets, you will be the keeper of this tower with a clean record and a rope in your hand, and nobody in Kelsmere will be looking at you at all." She was crying. She did it the way she did everything, without fuss and without permission, standing straight up with her chin level. "That's a filthy piece of reasoning," she said. "It is my father's. He was a filthy reasoner and a good king. You'll be a wolf for 28 days. I have been a wolf for 28 days 144 times, I said. This is the first time I will spend them knowing something. Knowing what? The sky in the east had gone the color of a knife. That the 10th of the 72 stairs creaks, I said, and that you set a chair out for me before I had earned it, and that the whole of the last 12 years has been a bell that can be not rung. She got up on her toes and put her cold hands on either side of my face and kissed my forehead, hard, the way you'd seal a letter. And then she went in and shut the door, and I heard the bolt, and I heard her boots start up the 72 stairs. And I went down the Tower Road at a walk with my hands open at my sides, and the silver note coming back into my skull step by step by step, faithful as a dog. I got as far as the third turn of the road. The long bell struck the 8th hour of the watch, true and on the pin, and the sound came down the headland and hit me between the shoulders. And the last thing I heard with a man's ears was a woman 200 feet up in the dark, over the humming of the bronze, shouting one sentence at the sea with everything she had in her lungs. Next moon I don't ring IT. 28 days is a long time on 4 legs when you have something to do. I did 3 things. I learned the nets. They stacked them in the boat sheds under a tarpaulin, and I went down at low water 4 nights running and walked the whole length of them nose to tail. And I learned where the sewing was thin, and where Grenard's wife had been given bad cord, and used it anyway because she was not paid enough to argue. I learned there were 9 of them, and that 9 nets set along the north edge of the headland leave one gap, and the gap is at the tower, because you cannot net a road you need to bring men up. I learned the ground, which I already knew, and then I learned it again as a thing to be lost on. And I watched the hold. Havard came out on the wall walk of Caldrith most evenings. He had got thicker in 12 years, and he wore my father's ring. I could see it a quarter mile off, and I lay in the gorse with my chin on my paws and looked at it and taught myself patience the way you teach a young hound the heel. He looked at the headland while he stood there, every evening. A careful man does not look at a thing for 12 years unless it frightens him. On the 9th night I understood why the hunt had come now, because I saw him standing at that parapet with his head cocked, listening, and up on the headland behind me the long bell hummed her own thin hour into the dark, unstruck. She had begun to do it 2 or 3 times a night. Neve had it right. He heard it, and it was the sound of a bill being presented. Twice in that month I went up the Tower Road at dusk and lay in the bracken where I could see the lit slot of the keeper's window, and both times there were 2 shapes moving in it that were not hers. On the second night the door opened, and Tamsin came out with a pail and stood in the yard a while emptying it slowly, taking her time, and she looked out at the bracken for perhaps 5 seconds longer than a woman needs to empty a pail. She could not see me, she looked anyway. Midsummer came in hot and still, which is unusual on that coast, and which was the only piece of luck anybody had. They started up from the hold at the 9th hour of the evening, and I will admit that, when I heard 400 wolves come out of the Caldrith gate onto the cliff road, I lay flat in a fold of ground and shook. There is no shame in it. It is a sound the ground makes as much as the air. They came up in 3 arms, the way you drive a headland, and they set the nets from the north edge inward, and they took their time about it because Havard is a careful man, and at the last of the dusk they lit the line of torches and began to walk the ground. I let them push me. That is the part I had thought about for 28 days, not the running, the being driven. I let them push me west and then north, slow, showing myself twice at a distance, so the arms would tighten where I wanted them. And I heard the shout go up along the line the first time, and it went through me like cold water. 400 voices of my own people baying at the thing they had been told about. And I put my head down and ran the way I had planned to run, and every single yard of it was uphill toward the tower. The moon came up out of the water at 4 minutes to the 10th hour. I felt it hit me at the foot of the Tower Road. The shift, which never gets easier, and which I will not describe except to say that it takes about as long as it takes to draw 6 breaths, and that you spend all 6 of them on your hands and knees. Then I was a man, naked and shaking on a cart track with a hunt coming up the hill behind me, and I got up and ran the last 200 yards to the tower door with the moon on my back. It was open. There was a bundle on the step, my clothes, the ones I kept in the tower, folded with the boots on top and a knife laid across them. I dressed on the stair. I have done many undignified things in my life, and that is the one I would choose to keep. 72 steps, the 10th one creaked. She was in the round room, standing at the table, and there was a coil of new rope on it, and a lantern and her grandfather's rope knife, and the 2 chairs pushed back against the wall. The silver note in my head went out like a snuffed wick. "You're early," Tamsin said, and her voice was steady and her hands were not. "They're a quarter mile behind me." "I know, I've watched them come up since dusk." She looked me over once. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Right." She let go of the table edge. "Then the boards are pulled off the trap on the north side. The 2 lodgers are locked in the bottom store with the bar across. And I want you to know they went in willingly because I told them there was ale in there, and there was, and I am not sorry." "Tamsin." "The hour candles on the pin, 8th stroke of the watch is at the 4th ring of black wax." She pointed at the shelf without looking at it. "That's 4 hours and some." "And the rope?" "Tamsin." "The rope is cut," she said. "And I cut it this morning with my own hand, and I want that said out loud in this room, because when they ask I'll not have anybody saying it was you." I looked at the rope hole in the ceiling. The old rope hung down through it, and it ended 2 feet short of anywhere a hand could reach, and the frayed end of it turned slowly in the draft. "You cannot pull the bell from this floor," I said. "No. You can still pull it from the chamber. There's the wheel." "There is." "So this buys nothing except a delay." "It buys 4 hours of a man who otherwise gets none," said Tamsin Woad. "And I'd have cut my own hand off for 4 hours, so don't stand there costing it." 4 hours? There was a hunt on the headland, and a false warden at the bottom of the road, and a bell counting down over our heads. And I stood in that round room, and used one of my 4 hours the way I had used every hour I had ever had in that tower. We sat down at the table. She had made barley tea. It was scalding and terrible, and I have never in my life had anything better. I told her the plan, such as it was, and she improved 2 parts of it and threw out a third. She told me what Gorin had let slip, that Havard was coming up himself at the turn of the night, which no warden does on a hunt, because wardens sit at the bottom and receive the carcass. She told me the priestess Neve had walked up from Saltmere at noon in the heat, and was sitting on the chapel path wall at this moment where the whole tower could be seen, with the old book in her lap, because she wanted to be a witness, and had decided that being 60 was no excuse. And with about an hour and a half left, when we had said everything, she put her hand over mine on the table and said, "Now the other thing. Tamsin, the price." "There is no price because we are not opening the door. We do the hold. We do the truth in front of 400 wolves, and Neve stands up with the book, and Gorin reads his own warrant out with the clause in it, and let a court of the pack ask my uncle why the 8th stroke matters so much to him. That is the plan. That has been the plan for 28 days. And when it fails," she said, "because they won't believe a naked man on a headland at midnight, and he'll say you're a madman, and he'll say it well because he's had 12 years of practice, when it fails, and the 4th ring of black wax comes, what do you want me to do?" "Ring it. Look at me and say it." I looked at her. "Ring it," I said. "Every moon for the rest of my life if it comes to that. Ring it, and I will come up those stairs at every full moon until I am an old wolf who cannot manage the stairs, and I will count that a life, Tamsin, and I will count it a good one." She was quiet for a while. "That's a beautiful speech," she said. "And it's the same speech every man in this kingdom makes to a woman before he goes and does the exact opposite, and you can keep it." "Tamsin, I'm the founder's blood," she said. "It's the one thing I've ever been that's worth anything, and I've had it my whole life and never once got to use it, and I've thought about nothing else for 28 days. She turned her hand over and closed it round mine. "And I'll tell you what I decided, and then we'll not discuss it again. I decided that a woman who wouldn't stand in a tower for 8 hours with a wolf she already sets a chair out for hasn't got any business calling it love." The long bell struck the 6th hour of the watch above us, untouched, unrung, all by herself. The hum was still in the boards when the shouting started at the bottom of the tower road. I went up to the bell chamber and lay flat and looked over the sill, and there it was. Torches, packed into the yard and up the road, and the pale mass of the nets brought up behind them, and 400 wolves of Kelsmere in every shape between man and beast, and at the front of them, my father's half-brother on a gray horse with his cloak pinned at the shoulder by the seal of a warden and my father's ring on his hand. He had brought them all up to the tower. Of course he had. He had heard his bell ringing her own hours for a month, and he had not come to hunt a wolf on a headland. He had come to be standing at the foot of that tower at the 8th stroke with 400 witnesses, so that whatever happened, it happened in front of the pack, and he was the man who had led them there. Tamsin came up beside me on her elbows. 2 hours, she said. Yes. They'll come up the stairs. They will not, because the stairs are one at a time and the door at the bottom is a good door, and because he wants this scene. I watched him get down off the horse. He'll talk first. He's my father's brother. Talking is the family trade. He talked. He did it well, too. He stood in the torchlight in front of the tower and told 400 wolves that the beast of the headland had been run to ground in their keeper's tower, that the keeper was a poor half-mad girl who had likely been feeding it. A low murmur went through them at that, and I felt Tamsin's shoulder go hard against mine, and that the warden of Caldrith would have the door down at the turn of the night and finish 12 years of grief in front of them all. He said 12 years of grief twice. He had a habit of that. My father used to say Havard rehearsed. I stood up. Soren, Tamsin said. They cannot hear the truth from a closed door, I said, and I went out through the west arch onto the leads of the Longbell with the moon behind me and the whole packed torchlit yard below. And I put my hands on the parapet, and I spoke to my own people for the first time in 12 years. I will not give you all of it. I gave them my father's name and my grandfather's, and the oath words of the Caldrith table, which are not written anywhere and are only ever said in a room with the doors shut. And I named 11 of them from the yard by their faces. And I told old Beric that his boat had been stove because he would not shift his moorings when I told him to, in a council, 9 years before he had any sons to fight over it. The yard went very quiet. It is a particular quiet, 400 wolves. You feel it come up the tower like water rising. And then Havard laughed and shouted up that the beast's keeper had a mad lover and a good memory, and that half of what I had said was tavern gossip, and that if I were the king I should come down and be the king, and the yard laughed with him, not all of them. Not nearly all of them, but enough. There's your court, Tamsin said behind me. There's my court. Soren, look at the candle. The 4th ring of black wax was a finger's width off the pin. Below, Havard had stopped talking. He was looking up at me, and I saw him take out a small thing and look at it, and then look at the moon, and I understood that he had spent 12 years knowing exactly what hour it was. Bring the ram, he said. They brought a ram up the tower road, and men to swing it, and the first blow on that door came up through 72 stairs and into the soles of my boots. Go down, I said to Tamsin. The north trap, get off the headland, Neves on the chapel wall. She did not even do me the courtesy of answering. She walked past me into the bell chamber, ducked under the mouth of the long bell, and stood there in the dark of the bronze with her hands at her sides. Come here, she said. The candle came down to the pin. Tamsin, you've got about 4 minutes as a man, she said, and I would like a few of them, and then I'd like the rest of it, and I am not moving off this spot, so you can either stand under here with me, or you can stand out there in the wind and be noble at the sea. The door went in at the bottom of the tower. I ducked under the bell. It is a strange place under a bell. The world goes away. There is the smell of old metal and the great curve of the mouth and the clapper hanging like a fist over you, and the sound of everything outside comes in changed. She put her hands on my face, and I put mine over hers, and we stood there. When it comes, I said, do not hold me. Do not put your hands on me while it is happening. Afterwards I'll hold you. Afterwards you must choose me out loud, and I will not know you. My voice went. Tamsin, listen to me, I will not know you. 12 years I have had the mind of a man in that shape, but the shape has its own opinions, and it has been hunted all night, and there will be 40 men on that stair. Then I'll tell you who you are, she said, and I'll keep telling you until you sit down. Boots on the 72 stairs, a long way off and coming. Say the thing, I said. What thing? The thing you shouted at the sea. Tamsin Woad looked up at me under 1,200 weight of silvered bronze with the torchlight coming through the arches and said, Next moon I don't ring it. And the hour candle went past the pin. There is no sound when a bell is not rung. That is the whole of it. That is the great secret of the thing that had eaten 12 years of my life. It is made of noises, and if you simply do not make one, it has nothing to stand on. Nothing happened. For about 4 seconds nothing at all happened, and I thought, I did think it was a story in an old book, and none of it was true. Then the bell above our heads began to hum. Not the thin note, a deeper one and rising and wrong the way a rope sounds when it is going. The bronze got cold. I felt the cold come off it and down onto us like water off a cliff, and Tamsin gasped and her hands went white on my face, and I felt the shift start in me 4 minutes early and out of order, which had never once happened in 12 years, and I got out from under her hands and down onto the boards before it took me. I remember the last of it. I remember the boards coming up at me. I remember Havard's voice on the stair below shouting for the hand hammer, strike the lip, and I remember thinking with the last piece of a man's mind I had, he is late. He is 9 seconds late, and he has been careful for 12 years, and it has come down to 9 seconds. Then I was the other thing. What I have of the next part I have in pieces, and they are not a man's pieces. Cold bronze over me. The smell of a great many men coming up a stone stair, fierce smell, iron, tallow, my own ribs going like a bird's, a hammer swinging in torchlight and a sound coming out of the bell that was not the hour, a dull, dead, flat clank, the sound of struck metal with nothing in it, because a struck hour off the pin is not an hour and the silver knew it and would not sing. He struck it 4 times, I remember 4. And a woman's voice, low and close, saying my name over and over, and a hand, she put her hand on me. She was told not to, and she did it anyway, flat on the ruff of my neck, and she said, "It's you. It's you. I know exactly who you are, and I'm staying." The wolf did not bite her. I want that written down, because half of Kelsmere has told it wrong since. The wolf did not bite her, and the wolf did not run at the men on the stair, and the wolf did not do anything at all except turn its head and lean the whole hunted weight of itself against her legs, and I know what that is. Any wolf knows what that is. Then the silver came out of the bell. Neve saw it best from the chapel wall, and she has been asked to describe it 200 times and always says the same words, so I will use hers. She says the long bell of Kelsmere went white, the whole bell, all at once, white as a coal at the last of a forge, and that a thread of light came down out of the bell chamber, down the outside of the tower, down the headland, across the roofs of Saltmere, and went into the moonwell in the chapel yard where she was sitting, and that the well took it in the way a dry throat takes water. She says it took 11 seconds. She says she counted because she was a keeper too in her way, and counting was what she had. What I have from inside is this, the cold and then the weight of 12 years coming off me the way a wet cloak comes off, and then hands, her hands, and the sound of a woman crying out one short cry, cut off, and then nothing at all for a while. I woke as a man on the boards of the bell chamber at the gray of dawn with my head in Tamsin Wode's lap, and 40 men standing in the arches looking at me. The long bell hung over us dull as a cook pot. Every grain of the moonwell silver had gone out of the bronze and gone home, and she has never rung true since. They took her down that autumn, and she stands on a plinth in the chapel yard with her mouth in the grass, and children put their heads in her. And behind the 40 men was my father's half-brother, with a hand hammer in his fist and my father's ring on his finger, and there was nowhere in the world for him to look. He tried, I will give him that. He was a careful man to the end, and he opened his mouth to be careful one last time, and old Berwick of Saltmere, who had lost a boat and gained 2 quarreling sons, and had come up that hill to kill a wolf, said, without any heat at all, "Havard, why were you hitting the bell?" That was it. That was the whole trial, really. Everything after it was procedure. 400 wolves had stood in a yard and watched their warden abandon a hunt, go up a tower alone, and take a hammer to the lip of the long bell 9 seconds after an hour that no keeper had struck. An hour that his own standing orders, which Goran Sedge had in his satchel and read out at the foot of the stair in a voice that got smaller with every line, made the gravest breach in the gift of this hold. Neve came up the 72 stairs at her own pace with the white book under her arm and read them the right of the hours in front of everyone. And when she got to the part about the buyer paying honestly, the sound that went through those men was not a sound I ever want aimed at me. He did not deny it in the end. He said one thing when they took the ring off him, and he said it to me and not to them, and it was, "You would have been a soft king." And I said, "Yes, probably," and that was the last conversation I ever had with my father's brother. He is alive. He is on the Skerry, which is a bare rock with a house on it 11 miles out, and a boat goes with meal and oil twice a month, and he may walk on his rock in any direction he likes for the rest of his life. The pack wanted the other thing. They wanted it loudly in the yard at Caldrith, 400 of them. I stood on my father's step and told them that a man who buys another man's hours cheaply should be made to keep his own at length, and that I had had 12 years of a cage and had discovered I did not care for the trade in them. They took it not gladly, they took it. Now the price, because I said I would tell it, and I will not be one of those kings whose stories have no cost in them. The silver took its due at the moment the well drank, and what it took was this: Tamsin Woad has never since heard a bell. Everything else, yes. My voice, the sea, the gulls, a kettle, a fiddle at midwinter, all of it perfectly. But bells are a silence to her. She has stood a foot from a handbell being rung by a laughing child and watched it and smiled and heard nothing at all. The hour-keeper of the long bell paid for my 12 years with every bell of the rest of her life, and when the priestess told her what had been taken, she sat still for a moment and then said, "Is that all?" And then she laughed, and could not stop, and I held her while she did it, and she was not laughing, and neither of us has ever pretended otherwise since. The moonwell of Saltmere holds the moon again. Neve keeps it and sings flat at it twice a day, and it does not seem to mind. The foundry yard is open and the charter is restored. I signed it a third time, in a shaking hand, at a table in a tower before I had had a wash, and there is a Woad drawing metal in Saltmere again, a second cousin of hers with a squint and a temper, who has never once thanked me and never will. And on the shortest night of that summer, I stood in the hall at Caldrith in front of the whole pack of Kelsmere, and I did not make a speech, because I had learned something about talking from watching my uncle do it well. I said, for 12 years the hours of your king were counted by a woman in a cold room for 16 shillings a year, and she set out a second chair before he had earned one, and when the hour came to choose, she let go of the rope. I said, I have nothing to give her that she has not already bought outright. I said, this is Tamsin of the Woads, the founder's blood, keeper of the long bell, and she is your Luna. And if any wolf here has a word to say about her hearing, or her wolf, or her 16 shillings, he may say it to me now while I am in a good mood. Nobody did. They came up one at a time and did the old thing, the hand under the hand, 400 of them, and it took until the sky went gray, and she stood the whole time and would not sit, and she could not hear the bell they rang over the gate for her, and she told me afterwards that she had felt it perfectly well through the flags in her feet, and had liked it better that way. We do not keep a bell at Caldrith now. There is no watch struck in my hall, and no hours rung on that headland, and the town of Saltmere runs on the tide, and the light like it did before anyone thought to count anything, and complains because they are fishermen. I brought 2 things down off that tower myself, and would let nobody else carry them. The first was the chairs. They are at the high table at the near end, and they do not match anything in that hall, and the steward has asked me twice about them. The second is on the mantel of our chamber. A coil of tarred hemp with a worn leather grip, cut through clean by a rope knife on a hot morning in midsummer by a woman who had decided, and did not tell me until it was done. Some nights I take it down and turn it over, and she takes it off me and puts it back and tells me to come to bed. I do not know what hour that is. I have not known what hour it is for years now, and I am not looking it up.